Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Nikita, and I'm a girl guide from Johannesburg, South Africa, and I will be moderating today's webinar. I have been involved in Girl Guides essentially my entire life, and I think it's what's made me extremely passionate about issues that affect young girls and women throughout the world. I am currently a third-year student studying towards my Bachelor of Arts degree in International Relations, and I plan on pursuing a career in international sustainable development. So as a university student, I have noticed that victim blaming is a huge part of rape culture as a whole on university campus. Many of you may know Yeneni. She was a university student here in South Africa who was raped and murdered at the end of last year. And it sparked a revolutionary movement here in South Africa with regards to gender-based violence against young women. However, many people were still using language such as, what was she wearing? Or why was she alone when the incident happened? Which is why it's so important to still be having these conversations with regards to victim blaming, to educate people and to inform people as to why it's never the victim's fault, and changing the rhetoric towards actually putting emphasis on the perpetrator themselves. So going forward, I would like to introduce Heidi Jokinen. She is the chair of the WAGGGS board, and she will be giving us a welcome address, as well as WAGGGS' position with regards to victim blaming. Hi there, Heidi.
Good day, Nikita, and good day, everyone else. On such an important topic that Nikita was just introducing and explaining, I'm really honored to be welcoming all of you from our member organizations, from the WAGGGS member organizations, but also anyone joining us live on YouTube to talk about this very, very important topic. This session, in fact, is one of the sequences on a series of events that the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts is organizing for the 16 days of activism. And of course, to talk about the victim blaming and how it's not acceptable at all. Today, I'm particularly pleased to be welcoming the distinguished experts speaking at the panel today. So please join me in welcoming Nikat Dad, founder and director of Digital Rights Foundation in Pakistan, as well as Susanna Chiarotti, who is the director of the Institute for Gender, Law and Development in Argentina. With us there is equally Jean Enriquez, the executive director of the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women Asia Pacific from the Philippines. Also, please welcome Suad Abudaye, Middle East consultant at Equality Now in Jordan, as well as Harriet Wistrick, founder and director of Centre for Women's Justice in the UK. And finally, please welcome also Marie Goret Kusinza, gender expert at the Pansy Foundation from Democratic Republic of Congo. Each year, WAGGGS and the Stop the Violence campaign invites the movement to join an awareness-raising campaign on a certain thematic area. This year, we have chosen the theme of victim blaming, standing in solidarity with all girls and women who have been made to feel like they are responsible for the violence inflicted on them. COVID-19 has not created violence against women and girls. This has existed long, long before. However, the circumstances within which women and girls now have to navigate has drastically changed. It has led to both private and public spaces becoming unsafe for some. We've seen a dramatic worldwide increase in domestic violence, femicides, trafficking, female genital mutilation, child pornography, as well as increased harassment of women and girls in the digital space. All of which you will hear about shortly from our experts. Within our own movement, the Girl Guide movement, during lockdown, we have heard distressing news of girls being raped and murdered, and an increase in child marriage and forced labor. Along with all these forms of violence against women and girls, we often see the perpetrators, usually male, made invisible, and the emphasis placed on the victim or survivor. What were they wearing? Why were they late at night by themselves? Why were they drinking? Why weren't they careful? At WAGGGS, we really want to send a message to all women and girls that violence done to them, no matter what, it's never their fault and should never be excused or tolerated. Therefore, I'm very glad to see this panel today, as precisely these themes will be discussed and emphasized. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Heidi. So I would like to introduce our first speaker, Susanna Chiarotti. Chiarotti is a feminist and human rights lawyer and lives in Argentina. She is currently the director of the Institute of Gender, Law and Development in Rosario, Argentina. She belongs to the Consultative Council of the Latin American and Caribbean Committee for the Defense of Women's Rights. She is also a member for the Organization of American States Committee of Experts on Violence, and she is a teacher at the Master of Gender at the University of Rosario, and at a course on gender and justice at Flaxo, Argentina. Hello, Susanna, how are you?
Fine, thank you. I want to thank WAGGGS for inviting me to share this conversation. This issue that you have selected is really a very important one. I will speak from the juridical point of view and the justice system in Argentina and Latin America. This justice system has shifted the burden of blame onto victims to atrocious extremes, such as holding a 3-year-old baby for searching for the adult lab, a 12-year-old girl because she grew up prematurely, or a woman burned to death for sending many messages demanding more attention from her rock star husband. The mechanism of blaming the victim is a complex construction of patriarchal culture, involves religion. In order to dismantle it, several aspects must be analyzed. I consider the most important to be 3. First, the discriminatory stereotypes of women that permeate our entire culture, including the law and the justice system. Second, the meaning and objectives of violence against women, and C, the victim's sense of guilt. Regarding the first, the discriminatory stereotypes, when women suffer violence, who suffer violence demand justice, they often have to face the prejudices and discriminatory stereotypes of the judicial system, which ends up investigating women and girls instead of focusing on the investigation of the crime and the responsibility of the perpetrator. Gender stereotypes have the effect of marking an order of things, a normality, and function as mechanism of social discipline that reproduce a culture that is discriminatory against women. They are deeply rooted in the imagination of judicial operators, as well as in the doctrine and jurisprudence they use in their daily work. Tamar Peach, the Italian criminologist, says that tell us about the stereotype of the good victim built from the law. The good victim is respectable, not sexually promiscuous. She dresses so as not to attract attention. She does not take drugs or drink. She always leaves her house with a specific reason and does not keep bad company. In turn, her testimony will be credible as long as she can prove that she did not place herself in a dangerous situation and has resisted her aggressor. Judges who hear cases of violence against women are part of a legal tradition, a patriarchal society which repeats discriminatory stereotypes against women. The second point, the meaning and purpose of violence against women. We need to understand that it's a way of controlling their freedom. A key element in the analysis is to uncover the true nature of violence against women, especially sexual violence and rape, in order to separate everything that might appear erotic and sexual, as it is quite common to confuse rape with violent sex. In reality, rape is a form of control over women. It is the most powerful and dissuasive. It is a political tool. Violence against women allows the control of the space where we move, such as streets, squares. It forces us to avoid solitary or dark places. It also forces us to cut down on the time we spend on our activities, so it's space and time, avoiding the night. In case we transgress those rules, going to places that are understood to be dangerous for women, late at night, for example, dangerous for women just because there are men circulating there, or going out of the house, the assigned place, late at night, our claim will not be believed. Rape also curtails the freedom to dress or wear makeup as a woman wishes. In rape trials, the forensic doctor, the judge, and the defendant himself will all mention the way the victim was dressed. If she was wearing a miniskirt, tight trousers, or makeup, they will refer to the woman's provocative appearance and dismiss her complaint, claiming that she actually provoked the rapist or wanted to have a sexual relationship with him. This type of restriction is not suffered by the other sex, as a man can walk around in shorts on the streets or with his torso naked, and no one will think that he wants to be raped. In this way, gender-based violence and specifically rape become an indirect mechanism of control over women to keep us in our assigned place, cut our freedom of movement and our capacity to act. The third element is the victim's sense of guilt, and this was inserted in our brains since 5,000 years ago. It's a facet that we have analyzed less, that of the feeling of guilt, which to varying degrees affects girls and boys and women who have suffered or are suffering from gender-based violence. Guilt is often greater in cases of sexual violence. How did we arrive at this? Why does it seem logical to us? What is totally absurd? Why do innocent people consider themselves guilty, at least in part, or feel a shadow of doubt? Have I done something to provoke this? In an investigation into sexual violence in clandestine detention centers during the time of the military dictatorship in Argentina, we interviewed women and men who were victims of torture, rape, and other abuses of sexual violence. These people have been abducted, and in the clandestine center, they were mostly tied up hand and foot, hooded and locked in narrow cubicles. Their chances of resistance were non-existent. However, while most men felt anger, most women felt shame and guilt. Several even claimed that for years they asked themselves if they perhaps had an attitude or did something that could have led to the abuse. What psychological mechanism can lead to this situation? Is it likely that the breakdown of the mandate to stay at home and not venture into the public world of politics has influenced them to feel guilty? This participation in the public world is a rebellion against the patriarchal order. Is it possible that this guilt is inserted into the brains of women in such a way that they feel guilty? In his book on male oppression, Pierre Bourdieu the French sociologist, argues that patriarchy becomes strong by directly affecting the place that guarantees its reproduction, women's brains. Which is the path to deconstruction? The women movement, as well as national and international organizations, have been criticizing this practice of blaming the victim. These criticisms are having a positive effect, and there have already been important judgments reviewing discriminatory rulings. Among the many advances made in terms of brevity, we will cite two very significant ones. We have jurisprudence from the Inter-American Court on Human Rights. In the case, for example, Marie Isabel Vélez Franco and others versus Guatemala, the court deepened the doctrine of Cottonfield, attacking the inadmissibility of investigation directed on the basis of gender stereotype insofar as they shift the blame for what happened onto the victim. Among other international precedents that show that there is progress in this area, the rules of procedures and evidence, which are an instrument for the implementation of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, contain rules that should be replicated in national legislation, such as Rule 70 and 71. Sorry, I need to finish by concluding. Progressively, we must transform the current penal doctrine, whose evidentiary theories were thought up by men, designed on the basis of the prevailing patriarchal culture, which incorporates all the inferiorizing conceptions toward women, adopting an appearance of scientific sureness and neutrality while reproducing the traditional roles of men and women. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Susana. That was very, very informative. And I think you make some excellent points as to it's never, ever the victim's fault with regards to what happens to them. So moving on to our second speaker, I'd like to introduce Suhad Abu Daye. Suhad joined international women's rights advocacy organization, Equality Now, in 2008. Prior to joining the organization, she worked for 10 years with the Women's Center for Legal Aid and Counseling in Jerusalem, a Palestinian feminist NGO that addresses gender-based violence in Palestinian society within the private and public spheres. Suhad holds an MA in Women and Development from the Institute of Social Sciences in the Netherlands, a bachelor's in social work from Bethlehem University, and a bachelor's in law from Al Aliyah Aman University in Jordan. Hi there, Suhad.
Hi. Hi, Nikita. Should I start?
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for inviting me to this very important webinar talking about victim blaming. Regardless of the little research that has been conducted in the MENA region or in the Arab world about dealing with victim blaming, we know that victim blaming occurs when the victim of a crime or any wrongful act is held entirely or partially responsible for the harm inflicted on her or him. Usually women in the region, women and girls in the region, are the ones who are blamed for the harm and abuse they suffer from. And I think we share with the previous presenter about how the society, the culture affects women in the way they are wearing. Because you wear like this, that's why you have been assaulted, and so on. So we share a common perspectives about victim blaming, because I think violence against women is a universal social problem that women and girls around the world are really suffering from. But in the region, we have also another dimensions to that in regard to the loss of virginity, which can be perceived as dishonoring family, even in the cases of sexual abuse and or exploitation. and girls victims really pay far a different price when we compare them to boys. Family honor outweighs girls' rights and becomes the issue instead of the abuse and exploitation. Female victims can be forced, unfortunately, or pressured to marry the perpetrators in cases of rape or being kidnapped and raped. And I will be, in my presentation, I will talk about one of the articles in the Kuwait, for example, one article 182, which really forces girls who are kidnapped and raped to marry the perpetrators. Girls who fall victim to sexual exploitation may not be even viewed as victims at all in our region, unfortunately, but rather perceived as being responsible for the violence they suffered and thought to have been careless in protecting themselves. Victims blaming can also be partially attributed to power inequalities between males and females, and also between adults and children. But for us, I think we have to know and we have to believe that children can never consent to their own exploitation by adults. In some countries in the region, victims are not only blamed by society on the crime inflicted on them, but also victims might be punished by the court. And I might give you an example about a case from Saudi Arabia, and it was really a very well-known case about Al-Qatif, which is an area in Saudi Arabia that two girls were gang raped, and the victims, the Saudi Sharia court sentenced the perpetrators to a different kinds of sentences, but also the court sentenced also the girls who has been victims of this gang rape. And this is really extremely we can't really comprehend how victims can be also punished in Saudi Arabia, unfortunately. Another obvious clauses or articles that victims in our region are blamed is what it exists in the Arab penal codes. Most of the countries in the Arab region have laws that pardon, unfortunately, rapists and perpetrators from punishment if they marry their victims. The provision in the penal code prevents victims from deny justice to survivors, signal that rape is not a serious crime and can be talked or bargained away, allow women to be treated as possessions between families, take away the survivor's control of her choice and future, and risk her continued abuse. You know, such provisions are still in effect in so many countries, unfortunately, including in Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Syria, Libya, Lebanon, and Algeria. Provisions which provide marital rape in the region is not criminalized, so we have really to work on criminalizing also marital rape. Build supportive entities for victims and survivors of abuse and violence. And we really need to work to change the mentality of the communities, the judges on victims of rape and abuse. And we need to change the mentality, which is like really deep-rooted, you know, about women's position in society. Women and human rights organizations are endlessly working in the region to change the perception about women through working on repealing, amending, or enacting new laws that really don't discriminate against women and girls. And we need to really focus on the youth. And I am very happy that this organization is working with the youth because we are relying on the youth to start having a new cultures in regard to women and girls. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Suad. Yeah, you can't really change the atmosphere of victim blaming until. Hi there. I think you're still on mute.
Vous m'écoutez maintenant? Est-ce que vous m'entendez? Vous m'entendez? Ok, je suis Marie-Gorette Kusinza. Oh là là. Oui, c'est ça.
We can hear you, Marie. You can continue talking.
Oui, je continue maintenant. Merci beaucoup. Oui, je suis Marie-Gorette Kusinza, experte en genre à la Fondation Panzi et attachée au projet Badilika. Les raisons, donc la thématique qui a été développée est vraiment très importante parce que cela a prouvé à plus forte raison que les femmes et les hommes acquis au changement doivent continuer encore à travailler sur la victimisation des femmes ou des personnes qui ont subi des violences. Quand on a essayé d'étaler ce qui s'est passé à Koweït ou en Arabie Saoudite, j'ai vu vite que ça concordait avec tout ce que nous vivons ici au Congo. Vous savez que la Fondation Panzi, c'est une vision qui a été mise en place par les professeurs docteurs, le prix Nobel 2018, Denis Mukwege. C'est un réseau de multiples travaux et des cas désolants qu'il a à l'hôpital de Panzi. Et maintenant, pour essayer de pallier à ces cas, pour essayer maintenant à remédier à des différentes situations auxquelles il s'est avec son équipe, il a vu qu'il fallait créer un modèle de travail. Et ce modèle de travail s'appelle One Stop Center. Dans ce modèle, il y a la mission, il y a des objectifs, mais laisse-moi vous parler d'abord des cas que nous avons à traiter ou alors comment se range le modèle. Il y a d'abord le médical, parce que quand une personne arrive à l'hôpital, alors, vous me suivez? Est-ce que vous m'écoutez? Oh là là. Est-ce que vous m'écoutez?
Yes, we can, please. Yes.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Il y a d'abord le médical, la prise en charge en médical, parce que la personne arrive avec une santé très détériorée et on doit prendre soin d'elle. Mais aussi, il y a le modèle, la prise en charge psychosociale. C'est la victime, lorsqu'elle arrive, elle a des signes atroces dans sa psychique, dans son psychique. Et cela demande qu'elle soit prise en charge d'abord par un spécialiste en psychosocial pour essayer de les ramener ou de la ramener à la raison. Ensuite, il y a la réinsertion socio-économique. Parce que quelqu'un qui a été victimisé, quelqu'un qui a été violé, certes qu'elle a abandonné, elle a été peut-être chassée de son foyer, puisque chez nous ici, on voit que la personne qui a été violée, c'est elle-même qui s'est étalée, c'est elle-même qui s'est exposée, comme on a remarqué dans la thématique, dans l'exposé de mes sœurs qui ont précédé. Donc, on victimise directement la personne qui a été violée ou qui a connu des violences. On lui jette tout, on rejette en bloc tout sur elle. on dit que c'est à cause de son habillement, à cause de sa mauvaise mentalité, de mauvais comportements qu'elle a été violée. Et c'est pour cela que lorsqu'elle est chassée de la maison, par exemple, puisque chez nous, on prend ça comme un tabou, une personne qui a été violée ou une fille, ça porte malheur à toute la famille, ça porte malheur à son père et à sa mère. Et il y a même des foyers qui sont brisés comme ça parce qu'on dit on doit même plus, un mari ne peut plus avoir des relations sexuelles avec son épouse parce que sa fille a été violée. Et c'est là on fait recours à des marabouts, à des féticheurs pour essayer d'annuler les mauvais sorts qui a attrapé la famille. Donc, c'est pour cela que réellement, la personne est victime. Elle est devenue, à ce moment, à ce stade-là, elle est devenue très vulnérable et ça demande qu'elle soit prise en charge, même sur le plan socio-économique. Il y a aussi l'accompagnement juridique et judiciaire que nous faisons à la Fondation Panzi. Parce que lorsque la victime se retrouve, elle peut avoir des connaissances sur les personnes ou les bourreaux qui ont causé les violences, qui l'ont causé du tort. Et à ce moment-là, si le bourreau est connu, il doit être traduit en justice pour réparer et rendre justice à la personne qui a été violentée. Merci, ce sont les 4 piliers que la Fondation Panzi utilise pour le One Stop Center, pour la prise en charge de ces victimes. Et il y a, si on peut dire que c'est la victime qui s'est exposée elle-même à des violences, ça c'est une entorse. Vraiment, ça c'est craché aux yeux ou au visage de la personne qui a été victimisée. Et le malheur est que la socialisation ici chez nous montre que la fille doit se comporter de manière à éviter tous les dangers possibles. Et comment éviter tous les dangers au moment où on a des drogués, on a l'impunité d'ailleurs, on a des gens qui déambulent, et il y a des hommes qui sont attrapés en train de violer, mais en connivence avec les légalistes, c'est là qui détient les lois. Il les relâche. Il donne un petit rien là-bas, il donne une corruption, et demain, vous les verrez en train de se promener en étant libres. C'est là, ça cause maintenant l'impunité. À cause de cette impunité, vous voyez que les victimes n'ont pas de place. Les victimes n'ont pas vraiment le temps d'être remises dans leurs droits. C'est à cause de cela que même, je rejoins donc la recommandation des messages qui ont précédé pour dire que nous devons militer ensemble. Vous et nous ici, à la Fondation Panzi et en République démocratique du Congo, il y a beaucoup de tabous, il y a beaucoup de coutumes, il y a beaucoup de cultures rétrogrades qui discriminent les femmes. Et c'est de par cela que la femme est traitée comme une chose. Il y a même qui la chosifie, qui dit que parce que l'homme a donné sa dot, parce qu'ici on dote la femme, c'est l'homme qui donne la dot. Alors à partir de cela, l'homme se prévoit comme si il a acheté la femme. Et là, la femme n'a plus de quoi dire ou n'a plus d'importance. On la traite comme on veut, elle doit travailler comme le mari veut et à la volonté de tout le monde. Donc, même les beaux-frères peuvent taper sur la femme de leur grand frère. La belle-mère peut la maltraiter comme elle veut, les belles-sœurs, et elle est livrée à son propre sort. Donc, nous avons beaucoup de choses à faire ici pour travailler sur les normes. Et l'approche que nous sommes en train d'utiliser à la Fondation Panzi pour le moment, c'est la masculinité positive. Essayez de sensibiliser, oui, merci beaucoup, sensibiliser les hommes à comprendre qu'ils doivent aussi apaiser leur tempérament à l'égard des femmes. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Marie. It's really just some incredible work that you're doing with this foundation for young women in your country. So moving on to our 4th speaker, I'd like to introduce Niget Dad. Niget Dad is the Executive Director of the Digital Rights Foundation. Nigat is one of the pioneer women's rights activists in Pakistan and has played a pivotal role in defining cyberspace narrative in the country. She has been at the forefront of Pakistani feminist movements. She was recently named a member of the Facebook Oversight Board, an independent and diverse committee that works to keep content on Facebook in check. A lawyer by profession, Niget has also been listed as Times Magazine Next Generation Leader back in 2015 and won the Human Rights Tulip Award in 2016. Niget is also a TED Global Fellow and has used these platforms to create awareness about the patriarchal strongholds in Pakistan and how they affect everyday lives of women online and offline. Hello, Niget.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Thank you so much for having me. While I listened to our earlier speakers, I think they have set a very good foundation for this discussion around victim blaming. And when our fellow speaker was speaking from Latin American's perspective, I think I could resonate so much around the criminal justice system or different avenues around justice system which fails women again and again. So just to give a little bit background, that I'm by training, I'm a lawyer. I have been working on digital rights for the last almost 12 years. My focus is on gender lens while looking into the internet governance or cyberspace. And one thing that I have seen in my work is actually, the offline patriarchal mindset is actually, when women say that they are facing cyber harassment or hate speech or trolling or different forms of online violence, it's actually the mirror of the patriarchal society in the offline space, which reflects themselves in the online space. And during the course of my work, when most of the time when survivors of sexual harassment online or cyber harassment, when they reach out to us, the first and foremost thing is that they themselves, it's like the victim blaming is so ingrained in our and deeply ingrained in our society, where when they reach out to us, they say, oh, it was my fault. I shouldn't have made my profile on Facebook. I shouldn't have shared this picture. And that's where, you realize that your work around addressing the issue of online violence, it actually multiplies, because on one hand, you have to make the survivor realize that it was not your fault, and you have a supporting mechanism around you, and on another hand, actually dealing with the flawed and broken justice system, because you encourage a survivor that you can reach out to the authorities, or they're like these legal remedies available to you. But then when they reach out to them, the first thing that the authorities ask them, oh, but why do you need a profile online? Why you have shared that picture? Why you shared that intimate picture with your partner? And I think that actually complicates our work, because it's at the first step, it's even difficult to encourage survivor to reach out to the supporting mechanisms around them. So I think their fear is real, because when they say that people will judge me if I, and in coming from a very conservative, Muslim, patriarchal, male-dominated society, I think the fear is real, because they are judged by their family members when they say that, I'm being blackmailed by a certain person because of the intimate pictures and images and videos. But at the same time, sometimes these are not even intimate, when there are women who have reached out to us. So we have a cyber harassment helpline, in Pakistan, which my organization basically started in 2016. And honestly, the idea was to build, you know, the confidence of survivors that they have some confidential the system around them, where if they don't want to reach out to the government supported helplines or you know, courts or cybercrime wings, they can reach out to us and we can see how we can support them. And it's a confidential helpline, and it's a confidential helpline because people, you know, when they reach out to us, they don't want to share their names and their you know, from where they are calling us, just because of the fact that they might be judged even by the helpline people. And there are women who have in the past have called us from far from flung areas of Pakistan, and from villages, rural areas, towns where, you know, the patriarchal stronghold is actually pretty strong. And when they call us, they're like, someone has my picture, and usually we think it's like an intimate picture, but it's not. It's like they are covering their head, and just because that they are not allowed by their families to have Facebook profile or to have their online presence, they think that if, you know, anyone will share their picture, if a man will share their picture online and reach out to their family, and even if the picture is not intimate, they can be killed. And we have seen in the past that women in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which is like a conservative, a comparatively conservative province, and Balochistan, the tribal areas in Balochistan, women have been killed in the name of honor, just because of they were using mobile phones, or someone, you know, made their video like with full clothes on, with covering their head, and they were just clapping in the wedding. And the victim blaming, that why at first place someone had access to their that certain place and could, you know, capture that video, or why they were why they went at wedding and why they were clapping, you know, like, so it's a patriarchal offline mindset that we are now seeing in the offline online space as well. So most of the time, and we have seen this even in the Me Too movement also. We also have you know, like famous Me Too case in Pakistan, when the victim, with survivor comes, she came forward online, she had to face a barrage of you know, comments around why she's reporting after so many years, or why she was wearing those clothes, she was seen with the perpetrator, you know, in the pictures. So like all kinds of comments. And I think it's not just celebrities or people who have come forward with their Me Too allegations, but also in normal circumstances, women politicians, women journalists, feminists, activists, young girls, when they say something which in the online space, which sort of tries to break stereotypes or challenges the status quo of the patriarchal society, that's where they get a lot of trolling and misogynistic comments and hate speech. And I feel that victim blame, there is no one form of victim blaming. There are several forms of victim blaming in the online space, in the form of all the you know, the hate speech and trolling that I have just mentioned.
Thank you very much, Nigit. Yeah, as you said, there's not just in the cyberspace, there's not just one form of victim blaming. Victim blaming takes many forms in the cyber arena. So I'd like to move on to our fifth speaker, Harriet Wistridge. Harriet is founder and director of the Center for Women's Justice 2016, a multi-partner legal charity aimed at bringing cases holding the state to account in relation to violence against women and girls. She is also a solicitor with many years' experience working with renowned civil liberties firm, Bernberg Pierce Limited. She is the winner of the Liberty Human Rights Lawyer of the Year 2014, Legal Aid Lawyer of the Year 2018, and Law Society Gazette Personality of the Year 2019. She is also a founder of the campaign group Justice for Women and a trustee of the charity and the Emma Humphreys trustee of the charity, the Emma Humphreys Memorial Prize. Hello, Harriet.
Hi, and thanks very much for inviting me and for the opportunity to join people from all parts of the world. Unfortunately, I think the experiences we share of victim blaming are universal, and the UK is no different. I've prepared a short PowerPoint presentation, which I'm going to try and share my screen. So I hope this works, and forgive me if this goes wrong. Just a moment. Share, right, here we go. And I'll just put that on for slideshow. Play from start, there we go, okay. Hopefully that's sharing now. These are, you know, just, I think we've heard these from everybody really, but the sort of things that we hear, particularly victim blaming, you know, is at its most extreme in cases of sexual violence, but it happens in domestic abuse, coercive controlling relationships, and it happens even in murder. It's the classic sorts of things that it comes down to is that a victim is asking for it. And that might be because of the way that she's dressed, because of the way she behaved. Was she flirting? Because she kind of encouraged him, for example, that she had exchanges on social media which were encouraging, and therefore she deserved it. That she was out late at night on her own, and therefore, of course, she was asking for it. That she'd had too much to drink, or you know, she'd consumed substances which made her, you know, kind of vulnerable, and therefore it was her fault. That she was sexually promiscuous, that she's had lots of relationships, and therefore, you know, she was the sort of girl, the sort of woman who liked it. Therefore, she deserved it. It's her fault. If she was a prostitute, then you know, can she be raped? That was something that we've had to really challenge and say, of course, no one, you know, you have to have consent and autonomy. And this can include children as well. And we've had a, you know, scandalous child sexual exploitation where, you know, even somebody who accepted a cigarette, for example, in exchange for sex was sort of suggested that they have some kind of agency. You know, again, the whole responsibility is being put on girls and women. And, you know, sometimes women, even women who are murdered, are blamed because they were engaging, or the perpetrator claims that they were engaging in sadomasochistic sex or rough sex. And therefore, you know, it's just went a bit wrong, and she died. And in cases where women are murdered, often you know, the perpetrator will say, well, she was having an affair. You know, she was driving me mad, and I just was provoked. And the courts, you know, have accepted many cases, reducing the culpability of murder, sometimes even men getting off, by blaming the woman. So, you know, these are very commonplace stereotypes that you know, perhaps are different in different parts of the world, but are very, very deeply ingrained and embedded in our patriarchal culture. What happens if you actually get a case that goes all the way to trial? Well, you know, the woman feels like she's the one on trial, and sometimes women who've been through a rape trial in particular, or a sexual violence trial, feel, you know, doubly violated or triply violated by the experience. We just heard from our last speaker about the digital world. This is increasingly, and has been an issue, especially in cases of sexual violence, where a victim is required to hand over the whole of her mobile phone data. And we've had the issue of digital strip searches, where the police focus on going through your whole mobile system in order to find any evidence which might undermine your case, which they then hand over to the defence, who will use it against you. In the worst case scenarios, you know, we see women who are prosecuted for making allegations of rape. Maybe some of you have seen a really excellent Netflix film called Unbelievable, which was about a rape victim being prosecuted and criminalised, being disbelieved and being criminalised for her allegation of rape because the police just simply didn't believe her. And in Britain, we have women who report rape sometimes being prosecuted for perverting the course of justice. These are two women who were sent, well, one woman took her own life after, when she was faced with that prosecution, and another was sentenced to very long periods of imprisonment, sometimes longer than rapists, if they're ever convicted, are sentenced for. You know, the message that this sends, whether or not the women were very messed up and made allegations up or not, but is just, you know, you will not be believed, and if you dare to report, you can be prosecuted. Just to try and sound a kind of couple of more positive notes. I mean, there has been in the criminal justice system a huge amount of effort put into making improvements to the system to encourage victims to come forward. We know that very few women and girls report rape because of the fears of being disbelieved. You know, the campaign and advocacy of feminist activists has been particularly important in trying to achieve change. Some of the changes that just a few of those changes that we have seen include lifelong anonymity for rape victims, and this is important principle that you shouldn't be named because of the you know, when you report, because of this terrible ways in which you can be stigmatized for life around it. That there's been limitation on cross-examination of previous sexual history. There have been introduction of special measures in court, including putting up screens so that you don't have to face the person that you're accusing, or having a video link, so you're not in the same space with that perpetrator staring at you when you give evidence. We sought to try and improve the definition of consent, and we have guidance in relation to the investigation of rape and sexual violence around rape myths and stereotypes. So those police and prosecutors and judges are told to make sure that in the courtroom process, when they're deciding whether or not to prosecute a case, or when a trial is going on, to provide guidance to juries, that for example, if a woman reports rape late, if she delays in reporting, that doesn't cast doubt on her credibility. There are reasons associated with trauma as to why she might report late. That if she was wearing a short skirt, that doesn't mean she was asking for it. So there are a whole range of myths and stereotypes guidance which are sought to try and counter the prevailing, you know, endemic patriarchal culture of victim blaming. In the UK, they introduced something called the merits-based approach. So you try and look at a case on the basis of evidence, not on the basis of what you think a jury might return in terms of a verdict. However, despite all this, we've seen in England and Wales plummeting prosecutions for rape and sexual violence. We have less than 1.5% of cases that are reported are prosecuted. Despite all these measures to try and improve the system, unfortunately, the situation is very, very bad for victims, and we have near impunity for rape and sexual violence. Again, to talk about something positive in the light of that, Centre for Women's Justice is a fairly new legal charity which tries to bring strategic litigation, and we have been bringing a case against the head of the Crown Prosecution Service, that's the Director of Public Prosecutions, because we say that they are responsible for the fall in prosecutions because they have abandoned the merits-based approach, which is designed to steer away from the myths and stereotypes. And that case, has gone, has got a lot of publicity, and we hope will amount to an important challenge. So I'm going to end there because I know we want to have a discussion, and hand back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Harriet. I think both you and Suhad were very correct in saying that it's often the judicial systems that are perpetuating this language of victim blaming and not taking allegations seriously. So finally, I would like to introduce our final speaker, Jean Enriquez. Jean is the Executive Director of the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women, Asia Pacific. She was awarded by the Philippine President as one of the outstanding women in the nation's service in 2010, and is one of 7 modern heroes by 2011 by Yahoo Philippines. She is accredited as Gender and Development Resource Person of the Philippine Commission on Women. Hello, Jean.
Hi, good evening from the Philippines. Hi, Nikita. Thank you so much. And thanks a lot to Amber for inviting me. And I would like to greet also my co-panelists and Miguel, who I see in the audience, a very good friend of mine. And I worked with him in post-disaster areas on gender-based violence as well. So I'm speaking as a human rights advocate, also as a feminist service provider who have been assisting victims of rape, prostitution, sexual harassment, and all forms of sexual violence since 1998. Although I have been with the coalition since before 2000, yeah, so that's approximately that time. So where does victim, I would like to go to where does victim blaming coming from? I'm sorry to have missed the other speeches or inputs. It's actually very related to what we're speaking right now, where I came from. Let me just talk a bit about that. So we have started to develop a mobile application for victims of rape, other forms of gender-based violence, to be able to report using their mobile and to direct very quickly to service providers in local government. So we just came from assisting the local government of a particular city here in the Philippines, and so I apologize for being late. So I would like to go towards the roots of victim blaming. So this might have been discussed, but I would like to share as well that it's very important to remind also our listeners, our the public about the human rights framework, about human rights being universal. And often it is coming from a lack of appreciation on the non-discrimination characteristic of human rights, such as the right to the freedom of movement is often considered to be a right only of men. That's why young women who would be coming out at night to also exercise their right to leisure are often judged as wanting or inviting rape, which is of course very much a fallacy, not only because it discriminates against women in the exercise of rights, but also because it has to be said, no one wants to be raped. Basically, the rape culture, which is also being promoted, propagated by pornography, produces such lies about rape. And therefore, the idea of rape that is something that's enjoyed is often also widely accepted. So this is very deeply problematic because, of course, it runs contrary to what has been being educated, a concept on which we have been educating the public about, especially governments. So it's very important for us to remind the public about the standard or the norm that is called human rights, as basic as the freedom of movement and the right to leisure, which should also be claimed by girls, not only by boys. So often it is girls are questioned when they are exercising this right, but the boys are never questioned about it. Secondly, the lack of appreciation of the dynamics of rape and other forms of sexual violence. In our university, at the University of the Philippines, we have a study, and of course this is common across the world, but just to cite that 88% of rape is done by perpetrators known to the victim. And therefore the victim does not expect, of course, that men known to them, whom they trust, would be transgressing their right to sexual integrity, to autonomy, to their own body by raping them. So it clearly shows that women who are raped are not being protective of themselves. It is that they trust the men around them. That's why it becomes very traumatic for victims to be targeted by men who are in fact trusted by them. It is very important to also underscore that victim blaming clearly does not protect women. So those who are promoting this culture of victim blaming, if they think that it is something that they are doing to protect women, to tell girls they should be more careful, etc., in fact promotes the contrary. By blaming women, they are telling the men that when women do go out at night or drink with their peers, it is like they're telling men that the women are out there for the taking. So it is not protective of women, and it is also not instructive to men to be questioning asexuality that has been constructed socially. Often sexuality or the exercise of masculinity, that's often called toxic in itself, is not questioned as if it is something natural, when in fact it is socially constructed. So it's very important to question victim blaming, also not only in relation to how it affects women, but also about how it affects men. It definitely dehumanizes men by saying it is natural for men to be tempted to rape when women are acting a certain way. So it doesn't facilitate questioning of traditional male sexuality towards one that is responsible, towards one that is that doesn't exercise power over women or doesn't take entitlement over women's bodies. Also legally, the accusation against women as the ones who have been inviting the rape only seeks to mitigate the accountability of the rapist. So it doesn't help in terms of seeking accountability in actions that are deeply violative of the women's integrity and dignity. I'm sure this has been said, but of course the impact to women are very debilitating. In blaming themselves, they play over and over again in their head what they think they did wrong. And of course, it causes very deep trauma, as we know. And I'm saying this as someone, as I've said, who have been helping victims of rape. And of course, in cases of prostitution, repeated rape that are paid for. And I myself, having been a survivor of rape, I know that it really affects how we are also blaming ourselves. So even before the public would blame us, we have already blamed ourselves, and that is really deeply, deeply traumatic. According to the US Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, in most cases, a rape victim's acute stage can be classified as one of the three responses. So they may suffer from crying spells or controlled behavior. The survivor appears to be without emotion or shock or disbelief, reacting in a strong sense of disorientation. So we all know the behaviors associated with acute stage: diminished alertness, numbness, dulled sensory, affective, and memory functions, disorganized thought content, nausea, paralyzing anxiety, pronounced internal tremor, the obsession to wash or clean themselves, hysteria, confusion and crying, bewilderment. And this is just the first stage. And as mentioned by Harriet before me, not a few have had suicidal ideation. This is in fact the reason why we had to amend the law in the Philippines in 1997 from a crime against chastity to a crime against person, because the woman, the victim's sexual past does not have anything to do with the case of rape. It has nothing to do about her integrity or dignity as a person. What we're saying is that in fact, she should not be seen as someone who has been quote unquote dirtied, but the perpetrator should be the one who should be blamed very clearly. This is also the reason why the rejection of victim blaming is also the reason why we have a rape shield now in the Philippine law. Again, past sexual history, even behavior of the victim cannot be used as evidence in the law. So let me just show 3 slides from a PowerPoint. What then should be the attitude of the public towards this? If I can share my 3 slides. What can we do? So clearly we have to stop the culture of victim blaming. As you know, even in the Philippines, public officials would be the ones leading the trivialization of rape through jokes, etc. And we should not be following such example. In fact, our organization, the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women, has led groups of women in filing a case against public officials who have been making rape remarks and trivializing rape, because it has reopened wounds of rape victim survivors whom we organize. So upon hearing this public official make rape jokes, they were really crying, they were in tears, and therefore we had to cite the deep wound that such create on rape survivors. We have to counter gender stereotypes, the idea that women should be living in boxes and that men should always have the power and always have access to women's bodies, either through rape or through paying them in prostitution. We have to counter stereotypes that men men's sexual urges are easily aroused by just seeing women, or the stereotypes that men cannot make cognitive decisions in relation to sexual urges or emotions, and therefore the result will always be violence, whether physical or sexual. So we have to counter those stereotypes, because we know for a fact that this is not natural. These are socially constructed. And also it's important when we meet victim survivors to be able to connect them to reporting mechanisms. It's important to demand accountability from the real perpetrators, not the victims, and raise awareness on the nature of all forms of vow. Second slide, just to contrast what are the wrong attitudes versus what should be the attitude to be taken in a survivor-centered, gender-responsive, trauma-informed, and also rights-based approaches in dealing with victim survivors. Therefore, victim-blaming attitudes should be rejected. The correct way would be to treat them always with dignity and respect. It is wrong to be telling the survivors what to do. It is correct to be informing them of their options, especially that we, especially women's rights movements, have fought for laws that have made mandatory the services for victim survivors. We should reject shame and stigma against the victims, but promote privacy and confidentiality, reject discrimination, and promote their empowerment. Of course, we should avoid making them feel powerless, and instead connect them with support groups and also with services. Finally, I would just like to share with the public some healing statements to also contradict the victim blaming attitude. What the survivor really needs would be to hear these statements, that we believe in them. It is not easy for victim survivors to come out. It must have been said earlier that blaming them, in fact, dissuades them to report, and therefore the wounds are not addressed, they are not helped, and there's also no accountability on the part of the perpetrator when the women are not able to seek justice in cases that they would want to pursue the legal process. It's also important to tell them that it's that we appreciate that they told us their experience when they do so. To say that, to validate their feelings, saying that we know people who experience the same. And again, to stop blaming by saying this is not their fault. And finally, to say that they are very brave to talk to you and that you will try to help them. It's very important to make this empowering statement. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jean. I'd like to hand over to Heidi Jokinen again, just to wrap up.
Dear panelists and dear participants today, thank you to each and every one of you. The stories and insights we have heard today have been particularly distressing, I think, because they describe a true phenomena, something prevalent out there even today. And precisely that's why it is so extremely important to talk about it out loud, in fact. Therefore, thank you for all the brave panelists today for your continued work on the topic. And a special thanks today goes to Nikita Miller, our wonderful host who has moderated the panel today. Thank you for your guiding. I wish all of you a safe rest of the day and good luck with the important work you are doing to make it very, very clear that it's not her fault. Thank you.